Muy buenos días, señoras y señores. Welcome to this panel where my colleagues of the Expert Advisory Board of Succeed will discuss with all of you their visions and their opinions about a very attractive topic, the digitization of cultural heritage, modern utopia. Well, this gives room for a very warm and active discussion. And let me introduce all of them so that you know with whom you are dealing. First of all, Jill Cousins, representing and director of Europeana. I continue on this side. Mr. Abbamonte, representative of the European Commission and dealing with all these issues of digitization. At my left, Michael Keller from Stanford University, United States. And last but not least, Stephen Krauwer of the Utrecht University in the Netherlands. Researcher mainly, professor, researcher mainly. Okay, so we have, I myself am Milagros del Corral. I used to be a former Deputy Assistant Director General for Culture in UNESCO Paris, and more recently, Director General of this library, the National Library of Spain. And it's a pleasure to meet you all, and we will start. I will give the floor for short interventions to each of my colleagues, and then we will produce a discussion with those of you who are interested in intervening and give us also your opinions. Well, I would like to invite first Jill Cousins to give us the first intervention.
That's because I've got pretty pictures, not for any other reason. So I need to make this work. Help somebody? How do I make the play come up on here? I need some help making this come up.
Just press F5 and you'll...
F5. Superb. This is a very big topic. I don't pretend to know even half the answers to the questions that were posed to us, but I really love the idea that we are trying to create a modern utopia. I think it's very important that we have a vision as to why we are doing all the work that we are doing, to digitize the material, to make it available and reusable. So I love the topic. I'm not sure we'll get there to a complete utopia, but I think we can get quite a long way towards it. We're about to release our strategic plan for 2020, and we want to achieve all of the things that are set out on here. And we can only do that if the material is available digitally and that it is in a form that can be reused. We're doing it because we believe culture changes lives. We believe it helps people to understand each other, to create new things from old clothes, to fuel new economies. And we believe that there is a very serious demand for cultural heritage in new ways. And this is something that we're all experiencing daily. We can no longer make use of your little phone that you tapped out a text message on. You expect to be able to move things across your screens and to interact with them. So it's very important that we make sure that it is not just quantity that we are after, but there is quality. I want to just show you a couple of slides to put this all in context. This comes from the Enumerate report, where, according to that, 90% of our cultural heritage is not digitised. And of that 90%, only 12% is in Europeana. And even more interesting, of that 12%, only 8% is really reusable. That means that it has a decent resolution image that you can interact with. There is a direct link to it. You don't have to go through a myriad of other languages and sites to get to it. That it has a rights label against it, preferably an openly reusable rights label against it. So what the goal is to move from here, where the majority of the material is not reusable, to change that into this, where we actually end up with the majority of the material that we are able to access is reusable. It's very much about the networks that we have created. This is how we are going to be able to turn this huge pile, which we need to go on, making available. We need to work on ways of digitizing it, making it work for the new economies. I think that actually we need to be using the resources that we have already created much more effectively than we have done so to date. So the idea is that our networks should be working much more closely together in order to make this material available. So to actually make use of the stuff that is already digitally available in context that the users can get to it. Which means that our absolute priority is the improvement of the data quality. I want to be able to take the best of what you deliver in order to be able to put it out into different forms of usage. So it's very much a case of, yes, of course, you can give me fairly low-level metadata, or you can make available very low-level metadata. It only needs to have a direct link, and it can be minimum resolution. If it's under a license that is not an open one, then it really cannot be reused in things, educational apps, in Wikipedia, in new apps and new ways. So it is important that when we are doing the digitization, that we think about the uses of this. Who's going to use it? What do we want to make it? Who do we want to be able to reuse it? And that we attach that information to our digitized records and our digitized items. I want more of this. I want, we keep using the Rijksmuseum. We need some other really good examples. There are in libraries some very good ones, but this one's particularly good because of the quality of the images that they are releasing. They make good metadata, can be better. They make sure that it's available under an open license. This one is public domain. It is at this kind of quality, at the level that you can actually see the hair on Rembrandt's head. So you can see how it was painted. This really works in the new apps. So this is quality of digitization that would be great to be able to make sure that we have going forward. Why are we doing this? Because we believe culture is important, but also so that it works within the platform that we are in the process of creating and services 3 markets. I'm only going to talk to you about one of those markets very quickly. That is the market that makes reuse of this material. This is the developers and the entrepreneurs. The people who can make sure that it is reusable for research context, that it's reusable in tourism apps. Not for us to do, but that we create the digitization at the qualities with the clearance that allows that to happen through a service that we have called, like many of you also have, Europeana Labs. This we launched very recently. Here you can access the APIs, but you can also access the data that is truly reusable, and you can place your apps so that we make sure that the stuff that you have developed also can be reused by other people and vice versa. Is to be able to produce things like our own open culture app, to give examples of the kinds of things that you can do, a reuse in terms of natural history material in an educational game, Or this one that has really gone viral now. This is on the BBC Home Arts page. It's called Van Gogh It, and it is a bit of fun, but it is also a means of teaching about compositions of paintings, how you have light in a certain way in order to reflect things. So there is a serious element to it. The point really is that we need sufficient quality in order to be able to meet usage demands that we don't even know about yet. And why? Because we all believe that culture transforms lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Well, we just talking before shortly among us, we identified a number of issues that we would like to discuss with you. I think Jill has made a very good overview of all these issues, but maybe it's easier now to enter more in detail on the different questions now that we have the full picture, thanks to her. And one of these issues is, should we, when digitizing in European cultural heritage, should we move the focus more into quality or into quantity, knowing that the experience right now has been very varied, I would say. There is everything there. Maybe Stephen Krauwer would like to give us your opinion, and then we will move it. There are another questions which are not less interesting, so I hope we will have time. So short interventions
very
and
short
so more.
answer. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Of course, at first sight, I feel very much tempted to say, well, since Jill has shown us how much cultural heritage is still undigitized, we should really make an effort to do it all. Yes. But at the same time, when I'm sitting here, I'm not part of the library community. I'm researcher,
exactly.
And actually, I spend most of my time, let's say all my time, being the director of one of the newly created European research infrastructures. For the social science and humanities, and mine is called Keller. And we try to make digital language material available to all researchers in the humanities and social sciences. So digital language could be spoken language, video language, gesture language, anything that has a language component. And from that point of view, I think I have to resist the temptation to go for the volume, because if I look at my user community, then you see that the people we are serving are to a large extent linguists, they are historians, they are social scientists, and these people, they are not interested in, let's say, just pictures of digital pictures of books or documents or whatever. I mean, some of them are, but most of them are much more interested in the linguistic dimension, in language use, or they might be interested in the content. And if we want to serve our users properly, we have to ensure that all the digital material they get offered is properly provided with metadata to make sure they can find it, that's properly transcribed so that they can get access to the linguistic content, that the IPR situation is cleared. So there are lots of things that we really want to have. And so from that point of view, I would say, well, let's focus on quality for the time being, and let's leave the volume for later when we can afford it. And so this, I think we have to be a bit cautious.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, now it's your time,
okay.
Michael.
So I think
what do you think?
I think the answer is we have to do both. And I think the agencies that are providing the funding or the institution that's providing the funding should be driving one or the other. So for instance, I would say that for documents that reveal and support and make possible to understand a national entity, a national culture, or even more deeply into history, an ethnic culture, that more digitization is required, but of sufficient quality so those images can be used for multiple different purposes. On the other hand, for those of us who are in independent organizations and can get private money or use our own money, and we have specific projects in which we're engaged, such as the digitization of manuscripts, the digitization of objects, the digitization of artworks, flat artworks, high quality is terribly important. high quality enables other kinds of research. You never know what will appear. So it is not simply answered. It's a more complex answer. And I think if you look around just in this conference, you already see 1,000 flowers blooming, and it's good to have a big garden.
Thank you. Very clear and check. Well, I see now two clear positions in favor of moving more into quality. Well, I'm not saying that you were not in favor of that, of course. But it is true, this is a dilemma. We need quantity, but we need quality, particularly because this is not a cheap exercise. It's a very expensive one. And we cannot afford to spend our money wrongly with the best intention, but that later on, the reuses and all these things we will discuss a little bit later about the user requirements and new needs, etc. If they don't answer these needs, what would we have? A collection of pictures. Well, we will continue discussing this when talking about the users. Let's move to the what I would call the business model of these things. I mean, how to finance this all this exercise that, by the way, as you probably know better, even better than I, includes the preservation of the digital object. Yeah? It's an extra cost we have to include in our budget when digitization programs are put in place. Now, what kind of business model will allow European heritage ones to be digitized, and who is going to pay the invoice? Because you probably, I mean, you all know that Europe is not at this moment in the most splendid financial situation, and we cannot stop. And the organizations need to plan all these things, and this is complex things. There are already several models going on in Europe. So who would like to comment on that? Would you?
Well, sorry.
Just an opinion, short.
I lost because I prepared a presentation which covers all these points and all the questions, but if you maybe the presentation is not needed, so I would
sorry. The presentation is needed. You are going to close with your presentation. No, but just give just a pill like that.
The question, so how to fund all this, one should not, in my opinion, overestimate the cost of digitization. A 36 megapixel camera is available on the market, which allows digitization at a good quality already for less than 2,500 euros. So the cost, at least, of the tool for paintings or for manuscript is not prohibitive. There are various possibilities. There is money which is devoted at European level. So there are the so-called structural funds, which may be used for regional developments and which may be used also for digitizing cultural collections. The problem is that we live in difficult times, and in Spain, only 1% of the structural fund expenditure has so far been devoted to cultural purposes. There are private-public partnerships, so the companies can play a very important role in this field by sponsoring this digitization efforts. And of course, the state will have to play a very important role.
Well, so you prefer combined hybrid system, profiting of the different possibilities that exist.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, how about you? What's your opinion?
Well, of course, I'm a researcher, so I'm a bit spoiled. And,
he never forget. He never forget.
So as a researcher, you feel that the state or the European Union, they have to pay for everything you do. And in a way, it's not unreasonable, because, since they pay my salary, they should also provide me with the proper tools and instruments to do it. And you should not underestimate, for example, how much, in in my university, and I'm sure it's the same in other universities, how much money is spent on, let's say, the labs for the hard sciences, you know? There it's very normal to have for one researcher 2 or 3 lab staff. They build equipment and all these things, and the universities are very much willing to spend it. And they have to get used to the idea that also in the soft sciences, in humanities and social sciences, there is a need for such laboratories, and both the staff and the equipment. So that's one thing. At the same time, I also think that there is an interesting role for the European Union to support that, because I think there is a very interesting, let's say, commercial potential in cultural heritage. I'm sure that you can build a cultural heritage industry, but I think it would be good if, I know that the Commission is already doing it, but if there were some incentives for companies and universities to work together and to invest in that. And I also think that it's important to keep in mind that there are big differences from country to country in, let's say, the economic possibilities. Big countries, even if they are a bit poor, like Spain for the moment, can still afford to invest more in these things than the small countries. And I'm always very much concerned about, let's say, the situation for the smaller languages. Because, you know, digitizing something for Maltese is as expensive as doing it for German. But Germany has a big economy behind it, and Malta has a very small, tiny economy. So you have to take that into account. And I would hope that the European Commission start thinking about how to support this, because the European Commission has a tradition of, well, not willingly, but pouring big money into the big languages, simply because they want to promote European industry, and there's more industry in the big language than the small ones. So the small ones are being ignored. And I hope that at some day the European Commission will say, well, let's also see what we can do to support the smaller languages.
Well, this is, yes, please.
I think we need case studies that justify on a big scale why we are doing the digitisation, so how it's being used, who's using it, what for, how it's fueling new industries. One of the prevailing business models on the internet is multi-sided platforms. So you have interdependent parties, that one side is only provides the material that the other side wants. It's a symbiotic relationship. A very good example that we're using at the moment is the Airbnb example. Got a flat to rent, somebody else wants to rent it, Airbnb sits in the middle, and it undertakes the transaction and earns its money from the transaction costs. I think there are models that we should be, those are the kinds of models that we should be looking at. How do we get the people who are making use of this content to be able to pay for its digitisation? And maybe that needs a real rethinking of how we do our taxation systems. If we can't get to that level, is it also, how do we get that money to feed back into the system? So we're looking at things like incubators, where they're making use of the digital material. They create a new app for education. They create something for tourism. They make money out of it. Can they then pay back into the pot so that some of the digitisation that should either needs to be maintained or improved or done actually is enabled by this symbiotic? They want more of this stuff. To give them more, you're going to have to find some ways of paying it. So I think there are beginning to be new models that we should be investigating, but we need the case studies. We need the actual reuse examples.
Thank you. It's your turn.
So I actually operate a business model which we would describe as freemium. This is for the Matthew Parker Online Library, a collection of about 550 manuscripts collected by Matthew Parker, Elizabeth I of England's first Archbishop of Canterbury, who wanted to prove through documentation that the Church of England had a separate lineage from the Church of Rome. We digitized these documents with money, principally from the Mellon Foundation, and they required us to try to run a sustainable business. So how did we do that? First of all, we provided at a certain level of resolution the images free to anyone. Anyone can see them. But for a fee from an institution, and I can describe that model in detail if anybody wishes, then the images were available at a higher resolution. The improved metadata descriptions of the manuscripts and the pages made searchable were provided to those subscribers. And bibliographies of modern works, selected editions and so forth, for each manuscript are provided. Now, in the end, we have had only 150 subscribers, but it turns out that 150 subscribers provides exactly enough income for us to continue to improve the software, the descriptions, the bibliographies, and the linkages to the digital versions of what works cited. It's a small enterprise. It won't ever recapture the millions of dollars that it took us to get the images, but it does support an enterprise of several people on an annual basis. The freemium model is not a bad model to contemplate.
In fact, if I understand, the model you are describing now is very much a model which is quite common in the network currently, no? All those platforms that have a system free of charge in a reasonable quality and so on, and then you have a premium possibility. You pay monthly, whatever.
Yeah.
You subscribe in a way.
It also has to be said that we have many critics, or people who believe that this should be provided free because it's a cultural heritage matter.
Exactly.
They're all over the place.
This is a problem.
But they don't operate the business. They just complain. And the 150 institutions that have subscribed have medieval studies, early modern studies, and their faculty want to make use of this material for their purposes, both for teaching and for research.
It might sound like a bit of a joke that we should be looking at how we are taxed, but if there's anybody from the UK here, they'll maybe know this story better than I do. There has been a move in the UK to get libraries and museums counted under the creative industries, so that it is recognised that the material that they are producing is fuel for the creative industries. And that makes quite a big difference in the perception and how much budget you are then able to get from ministers, because you're doing exactly that. You are creating jobs, you are creating new industries. I don't know if there's anybody here who knows that. There was a report recently, this year.
Well, my humble opinion is that it will take a long time until it really enters into the minds of people, at least in my country, Spain. But I mean, maybe one day we will be a creative industry as such, libraries. Now, the problem is that, the difference is that US universities have a completely different status of the public universities in many European countries, not only in my own. And the citizens tend to think that all this is part that the society should recover because they already paid their taxes in order to maintain this. And this is still a light nuance that makes the thing of premium version or like the one or the creative, the library or public institution, national library or whatever library, even university ones, that they will be considered creative industries. I mean,
Part of
part of the community. You can be considered therein, provided you don't ask for money. The moment you ask for money for something, then they don't see you as an industry anymore.
But it becomes important to support it, doesn't it? So one of the things I'm doing at the moment is trying to persuade not just our own DG of why they should go on supporting Europeana, but the DGs of education and research and enterprise, because if they start reusing this material and then at some point it gets taken away, the protest will be much bigger, and then with any luck they'll start to find the money from within their own sectors. So I think it's quite important that we make people understand why we've done it and the uses of it and make it indispensable.
No, my worry, I'm just provoking. It's not that I am against. I just try to warm the debate. My impression is that, or my fear is that this issue could be associated in the mind of our citizens as a sort of IPR thing in disguise, you know, because you pretend to do an more intensive use of our materials, and you ask us to provide a better quality because for your needs you require that. If you pay, for the people I'm paying because this is sort of new protection that libraries and institutions have found to exploit their resources, the document. Please.
Yes, well, there are a number of barriers, as Jill said during the presentation, to the digitization access and reuse. And a number of these barriers, which are IPR related, so they appear to be as very obscure, to say the least, to the average person.
Yes, that's true.
So to the average taxpayer who says, well, you know, I am paying, as you quite rightly said, my taxes, which go basically to fund these cultural institutions, and now I have to pay again to be able to reuse these raw materials, which is, you know, at least at face value, questionable. Now, we are in Brussels, so we are wedded really to an open data and reuse policy. There is a declaration of the G8, so the most industrialized countries in the world, which is an open data charter, which basically promotes open public data and reuse, not necessarily for free, of data. So we have enacted now a European law, which is a directive on PSI, so public sector information, so opening up public sector information and encouraging reuse. And something which is very important is that, okay, Jill spoke about 10%, so she said that only 10% of what needs to be digitized in Europe has been digitized. Okay, according to my sources, which are more optimistic possibly, I'm Italian, you're British, and so the sources say 20%, but for films, the percentage is tiny because you have this copyright barrier. And copyright in Europe, and it is one of the paradoxes of the European construction, is territorial in nature. So you have to be able, in order to exploit it online, to clear your copyrights on the films. And most films are still protected by copyright for every single country. This creates a massive barrier to the digitization, online accessibility, and reuse of video materials. So the upcoming revision of the European copyright framework, which will take place hopefully next year, should address some of these barriers.
I'm afraid we should. Yes, really. Well, in fact, as you see, we have been moving slightly, and so to the very issue, which is new users' requirement and needs that all our effort, digitization effort, should be, addressing, because otherwise we will spend the money wrongly, no? And in the issue of users, the inclusion of technology into new services adapted to the users, and what rights for the users with all this usage and mashup and I don't know, all these very, very modern things, but where really new knowledge will be created. I mean, this is the point. We usually say that a library or a cultural institution is not only to show what it is, but also to do in such a way that allows or pushes the creation of new knowledge. This is now more than ever the purpose of a library. And for that, you need to give room, this new content and new creation to happen on the basis of your collections. So, would you like to add something concerning these issues of users, new usages, or you think that with you already said, we could discuss this with the audience, because they are probably, many of them are probably users and have something to tell us.
Can I say something?
Comment? Small comment?
That's from my, let's say, limited perspective, because as I said,
You're
I'm
a
a
user.
researcher.
In
I
fact, you're a
represent the
user.
research community, and what I see is that there is a big, let's say, divide in the research community, in our research community, in that, for example, people who are involved in linguistics, all the linguists, they are very much aware of all the blessings of digital material, digital language material. They are used to using it, they exploit it. But at the same time, if you look at, let's say, historians or social scientists or whatever, for them, all these digital things are totally new. If you ask them, what do you need? They say, need? I've never used any digital material. Why should I start using that now? And so we have, in a way, we can easily ask our linguistic users, what do you need? How can we make you happy? But if we want to reach out to the other humanities scholars, which is actually a larger group, we should really make an effort to educate them towards becoming, let's say, users of digital tools and content. And that's an education exercise. And of course, you should not underestimate that, because you don't want to turn all these historians into technologists. So you have to, first of all, make them aware of the blessings of all these methods, and at the same time, educate them to use them in that they should be able to translate their research questions, which have no digital component at all, into questions that can be answered using digital tools. And that's a major effort, and I think that is a very important education effort. But we should really try to penetrate curricula both in universities and even at the lower level, so that people, that from a certain moment on, for those people, using digital methods in history, etc., is as easy, as natural as using a mobile phone. Because all these young people, they're very good at using mobile phones, much better than I am. So I have some hope that it will work, not for the older generation.
Okay, thank you. I see that
So
Michael would like also to add something.
I have a different experience. We have maybe dozens of projects, research projects in the digital humanities and the computational social sciences. We have from maybe 1995 provided technical support in the persons of experts with disciplinary knowledge and the ability to converse with ordinary humans on what's possible. And what I've observed over the last 15 or 20 years is how much easier it is to make use of text bases and databases and GIS. So a few examples. We have something called our literary lab. They have been investigating, among other things, the development of themes and characters in 17th and 18th century British novels. We have another group that is taking information from many different archival sources, using a GIS approach to show how slaves, people, were traded and then made free in colonial Rio de Janeiro. We have another project that has to do with the complex and different developments of Brazilian Portuguese versus European Portuguese. We have projects that involve the cost of, in time and money, of the passage of goods in the Roman Empire. We have another project that takes biographical information on the great and the good in the UK and shows family and blood relationships among what is now a fairly small sample, only 30,000 people, but we can now ingest data from the published biographical dictionaries and code that algorithmically and thus begin to show 3 million sets of relationships. And by the way, it's easy to show that Charles Darwin and I think Tony Blair have a family relationship through blood and through marriage. So the point is that there are already projects underway. I have grown my GIS unit from 1 or 2 people maybe 10 years ago to 5 or 7 people now. We are digitizing maps at a great rate. They're being used at a great rate. We have in the computational social sciences a project where we have a scholar at Stanford has demonstrated that political concentrations in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party exist to this day because of social differences of residents in different parts of the same district, So the people that were in the mill towns and along the transportation routes, principally the roads and the railroads, remain a democratic concentration. The managers and the owners who lived up on the hills and next to the lakes, not near the main avenues of transportation, remain Republican. It doesn't matter what period of time you look at it, it turns out it's all related to where the transportation is and therefore where the industries were. The point is that there are lots of examples in the digital humanities and the computational social sciences. They're littering the ground. There's an annual conference, an international conference, with literally hundreds of projects being presented. And what I think the meaning of all this to us in this conference and in this effort, this center of competence, is that we can almost never completely predict what's going to be done. We have to be able to allow mashups, redistribution of the data. We have to have enough quality, high enough quality, so images and text and numbers can be mashed together, extracted, changed. And at the same time, we can't be limited in the approach. We have to imagine that we don't know all the possibilities. I think that's supportive of your end point, but the big message is that the spin-offs of a digitization project or digitization environment are numerous, and they should be measured not just in money, but in other kinds of returns on investment. What is happening in education? What is happening in the development of new knowledge? How are these projects, in a way, published? How do they become validated? What is the peer review process? What do we learn from the way people make use of these sites? And how can we build more and better text bases and numeric databases and image bases for these kinds of projects? I think we're only at the beginning of the curve.
It's certainly true. We don't know what the future will hold.
Yeah, nobody knows.
I think we need
to be open-minded.
And make sure that the authoritative material that we hold in our institutions is available. So it's not just other stuff that people have put up on the internet.
Okay, I would like to, with your permission, to ask the audience if somebody, who of you would like to give an opinion or a question or whatever with regard to this very hot topic of the users' behavior and needs and requirements. How do you feel about that, the different models that have been here described, the problems that the future, the new paths that the future open up without, we don't know where we go in a certain way. Who on earth could have imagined how we now use the technologies only 10 years ago? Impossible. And they are there, and we use them. So, some comments, opinions. Yes, two hands. Number one is, please introduce yourself, your name and your company or institution. And the microphone is coming. The gentleman to the right. No, it's over there, yeah.
So my name is Uwe Springmann from the University of Munich. I think Michael summed it up to my ideas is very close. We don't know what we will be doing with the data, so it's very important that we have open access. Actually, not only open access, we need to move to open data, because open access could also mean there's a web page I can view with my own eyes. So I still stay in my role as a human consumer. But how many data are there that I can actually look at? I have to be able to treat them with machines, to repurpose them, to do mashups, all kinds of stuff. And I'm a little embarrassed that much money is put into the digitization efforts, and we on the European side still are somewhat riddled with old paradigms of how can we finance this and that, and should we do reappropriate old common goods, like making a scan of this, and now we have a new copyright, and we only give it free for money-paying institutions. Always there's this changing meaning of free. What does it mean? For me, it means primarily free of restrictions, not necessarily free as in free beer, as the open source evangelists say, but that's the key to the issue. But I'm a little bit embarrassed by being the research being held up by all these issues. can I take the scans and repurpose them, or must I have to ask for permission? Do I have to pay a license, which the whole justification of the license is in some obscure rights which probably don't hold up against constitutional rights, I don't know. I won't question that there need to be money collected in order to pay for all the services, but I think they shouldn't be based on a kind of making open data, or at least public goods, again proprietary by any obscure scheme.
Thank you. Somebody else? I take 2 more questions, and then our colleagues will have, eventually, if they so wish, to react to what they listened. 2 hands.
Hi.
One there. Yes.
Yeah, I would like to raise a question because it's mainly for Mr. Abbamonte, but talking about usage of content. For many people here, we know that we are entering a new phase in the European funding for research and innovation. And we have some information or maybe some feeling that the stress is moving from creating content to using content. So it would be nice to know what direction our authorities think we should move, because that will be very interesting for us to plan the future in research and innovation for the next 10 years.
Yes. Reflection. The last one, it was over there before. Please, this gentleman. I'm sorry, it will be the last intervention we can take over because time presses and we have also to think about the award ceremony.
You put a dilemma between quantity and quality.
Excuse me, please introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. My name is Alexandros Papandreou. I'm from Greece. I'm from the National Center of Research there. You put a dilemma between quantity and quality of digitization. Mm-hmm. But, okay, things that were digitized, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, are now low quality digitized. Should we just digitize them again in order to have better quality? And when are we going to digitize the rest 90% of the documents that are not digitized yet? So I think that we should just set our minds and have a centered policy and just have a red line and say these documents should be digitized and this shouldn't, and just digitize everything with the current technology and then run into circles until everything is digitized again and again in a better quality. But this is only a theoretical talk. And why is this? Because, as you mentioned, there is no funding. And actually there is funding, but it's quite expensive. And the one that is actually giving the fund is one that decides what should or shouldn't be digitized. It's not a central policy. There is no strategic plan to say this should be or this shouldn't be digitized. And for example, we have Aristotle, we have Plato, we have Sophocles, we have many manuscripts which are not digitized just because there is no one to fund it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, I think now I would give the floor to Mr. Abbamonte because he has a comprehensive intervention prepared, and I think it is useful for us, after having listened to so many fragmental positions, to hear what the representative of the European Commission may think about all this and give us a final vision.
Well, I just wanted to show you a couple of slides, but before doing that, I would like to to introduce myself a bit better, because I am not just responsible for digitization of cultural materials, but I am the director for media and data, so including all the European audiovisual regulatory framework, so including all the IPR thorny issues, and for big data. So my directorate is the one which is about to issue a communication, the future European strategy on big data, which will cover all possible, the future European ecosystem, which the Americans have, so that the Americans have a data ecosystem across the Atlantic. We still do not have a European interconnected ecosystem in Europe, which will cover all the issues of use, reuse, all the relevant, what we call them, framework conditions, such as IPR and data protection, because a lot of data, not in this field, but a lot of data that the German colleague mentioned before, so a lot of barriers that the research institutes face are due to the fact that we have a regulatory framework on personal data protection in Europe, which the Americans do not have. So it doesn't exist to the same extent. And then there was the question of the Spanish friend about the new research and innovation framework and a new emphasis, so from digitization to reuse and use. Something which is important is that we do not, as such, fund digitization. We provide some structural funds, some regional funds, which basically, so some regional funds which are then spent by the member states and by the regions, and as part of this, so part of these funds may be used for digitization. So as I said before, from the outset, 1% only in Spain has been spent, so was spent last year on the digitization from this structural fund expenditure. And this does not compare very well to the European average, which is 1.7% of the funds. I may understand that maybe Spain has more pressing needs now to be met, so more pressing requirements, but still, 1% is half almost of what is spent on average. An important point, I will try, sorry, I have access to I cannot trace it anymore, sorry.
You do?
Where is it?
Okay.
Can somebody help with where the presentation is?
Well, it should be here, but I can't trace it. Yeah, sorry. It's in a different format. Perfect. My
Okay.
Sorry, I will be really as economical with the time as possible. Something which has not been said. So the cost of digitization, that is not something which has to be overestimated or there are some hyperbolic really presentations about the cost of digitization. According to the best of my knowledge, the cost of digitizing one masterpiece in the Rijksmuseum was approximately 17 euros, which is not really, so you may say that they have all the infrastructure in place, but that is not really prohibitive. What needs to be digitized? Do we have to digitize only masterpieces? No. Because it is impossible really to predict what will attract the visitors and what will trigger reuse. There is a very good image. So it's a picture which was taken at the beginning of the previous century, and which was shared through Europeana by the French National Library. And then there was a site called Retronaut, a Dutch site, which basically sees this picture, and this created a buzz. So a number of people start using, reusing, sharing the pictures, but hundreds of thousands of visitors, and so sharing the pictures using social networks, placing it on Facebook. And now the picture is present in a number of magazines. So one of them is an American magazine which is called The Modern Farmer. So the Hudson American magazine. So this is something which was completely unforeseeable when the picture of the saddled pig was placed on Europeana. So business models versus public support. the Rijksmuseum. So for us, the Rijksmuseum is the example. So it's the setter of the best practices. So they opened in 2013 after, I believe, 7 years of closure due to refurbishment, complete refurbishment of the premises, and also digitization in their portal of 150,000 high-quality images, all free for reuse. So what happened? There were a lot of this triggered all sorts of brilliant ideas engaging the creative sectors. So apps, so this was reused for creating apps in the field of tourism, in cultural apps, educational apps, video games, but also for physical reuse. So for example, someone who decides to put a painting of Vermeer on his electric guitar, he can place it because everything is reusable. And that is what I really wanted to show you. A number of cultural institutions so look at digitization with suspicion, because they think that this may come at the expense of their traditional revenues. So there will be less physical visitors at the doors of the museums, and their bookshops will make less money because of digitization. But it is false. First of all, the more reusable digital content for the Rijksmuseum meant many more web visitors as compared to the Prado, which has not embraced a policy like the Rijksmuseum of reuse. So the Prado has engaged with the help also of Google in the digitization endeavor, but the content of Prado is not reusable. So you can see there is a big gap between the Rijksmuseum and the gap. But also, and it is very, very important, there were in the Rijksmuseum, in a relatively small country, and as compared to Utrecht, 2.2 million visitors since April 2013 until December 2013. And in the Prado, last year, there were approximately the same thing. So it means that this digitization and so embracing the digitalization revolution pays off, and pays off for valuing culture much more, but it is also a very important business model which can't be neglected in times of economic difficulties. Okay, there was a question on crowdsourcing, but I will say, well, just no, I will not say something on crowdsourcing. I will say something on the digitization divide. So, with the greatest respect, I disagree with you when you said that we pay more attention to large countries than to small countries. We even have a department dealing with multilingualism. So we try in Brussels to make, and there is a virtue and a weakness everybody has in the end. So even the small countries, there is a digital divide across Europe. So there is a digital divide between the countries in the north and the country in the east, and the country in the south, and between the countries in the west and the countries in the east. And a number of countries in the east are catching up. So Estonia is a very good example. They are catching up faster. And then there is the last slide, and I will stop. So less than 30% of the member states have a well-structured national strategy for planning and monitoring their digital agenda. So we have an effective and well-structured digital agenda. There are also fragmented initiatives at institutional project level in many countries. So the level of organizations varies greatly between your country and my country. So you're much better at that in terms of digital agenda than my country, and far better than Bulgaria or Romania, for example. As I said before, there is a large divide between types of content. So there are lots of manuscript, lots of maps in Europeana, but audiovisual, because of the fragmentation of copyright in the IPR framework, is still not very much digitized. Only less than 1% of films. And something which is important, not all member states make effective use of structural funds for digitization. And in some countries, including mine, there is an underspending of the structural funds. Not all the structural funds are spent up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I hope you found it interesting, the debate on is it digitization of cultural heritage, is it a utopia or is it not? Maybe it is, because it is very complicated, it has no limits, because new content is created, you need to digitize too. But at the same time, we should forget that utopia is a very powerful force to move the world in the front, to the next step. So I believe very much in utopia. I think utopia is, without utopias, I don't know what the world may become. So thank you very much for attending our discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry that I couldn't give the floor to more of you, but I see our Director of Impact looking very severely at me. I guess we have to stop here our panel because the celebration of the awards celebration is going to take place, I guess, in a few minutes, right now. No? Well, thank you very much, and we continue with the other aspect with the award. Thank you for your attention.